Merry Christmas. I'm so glad that we're all here together. I'm going to be reading Matthew 2, 1 through 12 for us today. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chiefs, priests, and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea. For so it was written by the prophet, 'And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judea, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel.'" Then Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what the star had appeared and what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go, search diligently for this child, and when you have found him, bring me word, so that I too may come and worship him." After listening to the king, they went on their way, and behold, a star that had been seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and they worshiped him. Then opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way.
Can you imagine what the Magi saw that night? What an amazing, powerful, life-changing moment to look up at the sky and be filled with a sense of awe and wonder. The kind of wonder worth following, the kind of wonder worth pursuing. But we can lose our sense of wonder. Life sometimes can be like a thief that robs us of it. Whether it's stress and anxiety, financial pressure, sickness, loss of a loved one, loss of a career, broken dreams. Christmas might look different for some of you this year. And yet Christmas is supposed to be a time of wonder. In a Christmas song we sing, "Star of wonder, star of light, star with royal beauty bright, westward leading, still proceeding, guide us to thy perfect light." But how many of us have lost a sense of wonder? Wonder with God, the wonder of life. See, the old Jewish rabbis, they knew the importance of wonder. There are all these old stories of a rabbi praying to God, and God would say, "Just ask me for one thing." And of everything they could ask for, here's the one thing they would ask for: show me wonder. See, I want us to briefly look at the story of the Magi. And let's take a closer look at the wonder that they saw in the sky. What might they have known that led them to Jesus with such awe and wonder that they bowed down to him in reverence? And my prayer for us this Christmas Eve is that we would allow our hearts to be open and maybe even recaptured by a sense of wonder, that no matter where you find yourself, no matter what challenges you face today, that you too will be held by a truth of a story known long before even the burdens that you carry today. To know and see a God who has been authoring this story since the beginning of time. The one who holds not just the world's story in his hands, but your story and my story. And maybe, just maybe, we can join with the Hebrew prophet in Isaiah who says, "O Lord, you are my God. I will exalt you and I will praise your name. For you have done wonderful things, plans formed of old, faithful and sure." So tonight, may we look at our lives and see his faithfulness, his surety, and the wonderful things around us. So let's get to the Magi. What do we know about these Magi? They probably weren't kings. I know we sing, "We three kings of Orient are." I can't sing, but they were not kings. But they were servants of the kings. But nor do we know how many there were. We often assume there was 3 of them. We're only told that there was 3 different gifts. Remember that there were 3 Magi. Nor do we know when they arrived to see Jesus. There's different scenarios that scholars will discuss. It could have been within a couple of months, maybe a year, maybe even up to 2 years after his birth. But what we do know is that they were from the east, meaning they were from the Babylonian Persian world, east of Bethlehem. So these were Arabs. They were Gentiles. They were not Jewish. They were not Hebrews. And we know that they follow a star, and that little piece of information is important, for we are told that they are magi, or in the Greek, the magoi. See, in the Persian world where they came from, in their Babylonian traditions, the magoi were this class of learned specialists. Particularly, what they were known for is their astronomy. They paid attention to the stars and their movement in the sky. And not only were they servants of the kings, they were royal advisors. They ran in the upper echelons. Sometimes they were known for interpreting dreams. We see this in the book of Daniel, a story that takes place in ancient Babylon, in King Nebuchadnezzar II. And he has a dream, and he summons the magoi to interpret the dream. Of course, they're not able to do it because the true interpretations only come from the Lord. But my question around the magoi is, what might they have seen in the sky that led them to embark on this journey to Bethlehem? And to go on this journey and bring gifts worthy of a king, because in the ancient Near East, if you were going to visit a king, you don't go empty-handed. You take gifts. And what led them to bow down before him? Proskuneo. In its Persian background, it's to fall on one knees and put your forehead to the ground in great awe and reverence and wonder. What might have God spoken to them in his creation through this star that led them to do that? Are there any hints in Scripture of what it could have been? Is it possible that somehow in the skies, in his creation, that God spoke to them and had written the story of Jesus, and these magoi had eyes to see and ears to hear? So I want to invite you on a journey with me and consider what they may have witnessed, the wonder of a God who is continually speaking, continually inviting those who are far from him to draw near. But let me pray. And I'm going to pray with the end of Psalm 19, which we're going to get to in just a minute. So, Father, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. So the Apostle Paul, he's writing to the church in Rome around 54 AD. This is after Jesus was born, Jesus lived his life, he was put to death and had been resurrected. And in this letter to Rome, he talks about this general revelation that has gone out through all of creation so that men are not without excuse for not knowing something about God. He writes in Romans 1, 19 through 20, "For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world, in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse." Paul is saying God has revealed himself in creation. So we can't say, well, I didn't, you can't really know if there's a God. In fact, we'll just adopt some, if we just waited around long enough, even the wood in this podium would somehow self-organize and gain consciousness. Talk about a leap of faith into the realm of absurdity. Paul says that he speaks through his creation. And we ought to know something about him. But he goes on and says, but we've twisted it. We've twisted his truth. We've perverted it so that we don't make the proper inferences from creation. Our minds have been darkened so we don't properly discern his truth. And he goes on in Romans 10 and he picks up on the same idea, again, of this general revelation that's going out to the ends of the earth through all of creation. In 10:18 he says, but I ask, have they not heard? Indeed they have, for their voice has gone out to all the earth and their words to the ends of the earth. Whose voice and who's it going out to? He's not talking about the Jews, the chosen people of God at this time. He's talking about the Gentiles, that they've heard a voice that has gone out universally. But when you read this text, naturally the question that arises is, like, who's the voice? He's already talked about the apostles, the eyewitnesses, and those who were one off to the eyewitnesses that testify to the historic life of Jesus. He's not talking about that. There's some other voice that's been speaking in the world. Whose voice? Well, we get closer to our answer when we realize that he's quoting Psalm 19. The heavens declare the glory of God. The sky above, or better in the Hebrew, the rakia, the expanse, proclaims the work of his hands. Day to day pours out speech. Night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, there are no words, whose voice is not heard. And here's where Paul quotes, their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them he has set a tent for the sun. Whose voice? Well, whosever's voice it is, they're also functioning as a tent for the sun. And if you read the next line after that, it talks about the sun coming out as a bridegroom, running its course. We might call this the ecliptic, the course of the sun, that it goes on an annual basis. And the 12 constellations that it passes through based on the 12 rotations of the moon. It's talking about the stars. The sun passes through each of these tents of the stars, of the constellations. And the psalmist says that these heavens with the stars, they declare the glory of God. That word declare there, interesting word, safer in the Hebrew, to write, to engrave, to narrate, to tell a story. It's this root word safer that would later come to mean a book. Is it possible that even within his creation, God has written a book pointing to his glory and the truth of who he is? Is it possible that God made it this way from the very beginning? Well, see, there's another interesting word. That word that I mentioned, rakia. The rakia, the heavens above, proclaim the handiwork, the works of his hands. This is not a common word in scriptures. It shows up a little bit in Ezekiel, one other psalm, but then there's this concentration of it way back in the story, in the creation account, in Genesis 1, on days 2 and days 4. We learn about the expanse, the rakia of the heavens. And if we go back to that creation account, some of you are familiar with it. It begins, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void. Darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. When we get to day 2, God is separating these waters. God says, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters and separate the waters from the waters. So God made an expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And God called the expanse heavens. And there is evening and there is morning the second day. That word for expanse that keeps showing up there is the same word from Psalm 19, the rakia. And then on day 4, God goes to work to fill the expanse. And God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the heavens, and let there be lights in the expanse that separate the day from the night, and are for signs and for seasons and for days and for years, and let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth. And so God made the lights, the 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars, and God set them in the expanse of the heavens. Did you catch that? What's the reason for the stars? for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. They're signs. Signs point to something, point us in a direction. This particular word, when it shows up in the books of Moses, it's signs that point to the faithfulness of God, his work and his interaction in creation with his human creatures. But let's clear one thing up, because if we start talking about the stars and the signs, culturally we can go all different directions with that. Here's what it's not talking about. It's not talking about horoscopes. It's not talking about finding fortunes or the future of our individual lives. Scripture is abundantly and explicitly clear in Deuteronomy 18, Isaiah 4, Isaiah 44, Isaiah 8, Isaiah 47, that to use the stars for any sort of astrological purposes of telling the future of anything of that nature is an abuse of God's good creation. Because it functions as a workaround. Well, maybe I can avoid trusting God with my future and try to control my own fate and do life apart from God. But what the sun and the moon and the stars and the constellations, what they are, is part of God's good creation. In fact, they're not just part of God's good creation. Scriptures even go so far to tell us that he named them. Now think about the constellations. Has anybody ever pulled up like a star chart and gone out and look at those things? I mean, do you ever look at it and it's like, yep, that's what I get for that. That makes a lot of sense. Just me? I'm like, yeah, maybe a T-Rex that got hit by a Mack truck. I don't know what that is. It can be anything. It's almost like there needs to be some sort of divine interpretation of the name and their meaning. Psalm 147:4. He determines the number of the stars, and he gives to all of them their names. Names are also associated with purpose and meaning. Could it have been that God gives the constellations their names? They have been revealed in the past. The Jewish historian Josephus, he makes such a claim. He says that those who were living before the flood actually were told the names of the constellations. It's interesting, when we look at Scripture itself, though, that the constellations, some of them are named in the book of Job. Now, the book of Job is fascinating because when you look at the style and the character of the Hebrew and the structure of the book, most scholars are in agreement that it predates even the book of Genesis. This book is ancient. And here's the sorts of things that we read in the book of Job. Who alone stretched out the heavens and trampled the waves of the sea? Who made the bear and Orion, the Pleiades and the chambers of the south? You go to Job 38. Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades or loose the cords of Orion? Can you lead forth the Mazzaroth? That's the constellations. Can you lead forth the Mazzaroth in their season? Or can you guide the bear with its children? Job 26. By his wind the heavens were made fair. His hand pierced the fleeing serpent. The serpent, the Nakash in the Hebrew, the Greek translates it with Drakon, the dragon. Known constellation. See, the Bible asserts that God made these stars. He made the constellations. He rules over them. He named them. But also they are signs. And as signs point to something different from and beyond themselves. They point to the Creator. Now, what's interesting about the Magi is the tradition of the Babylonian culture and the history that they came with. So we know this culture was mapping out the movement of the sun through the stars and the 12 stages. It goes back to at least 1,000 years before Jesus. But it goes back even further than that with this ancient Babylonian Parthian culture. It goes back to Genesis and Genesis 11 and the Tower of Babel. Same geographic area. And you look at this building project that happens after the flood. And there's this line in Genesis 11:4 that talks about humanity coming together. And they build a city and a tower. And its top is in the heavens. Now that preposition there in the Hebrew, it can be of location. Its top is up high, it's in the heavens. But it can also be of accompaniment, meaning a tower and its top with the heavens. meaning there's a tower, and at the top of it, there's some sort of astronomical representations of the sky and the moon and the stars. And we have great evidence of this archaeologically in that same area of different ziggurats that were built. You know, Burj Nimrud, which comes from Nimrod from Genesis 10, was built in this way. 7 different layers with the 7 visible planets at that time. But what was Babel about? Could it be this is where we see the perversion of the use of the stars? Because Babel is the story of mankind. If we can just push God out of our lives, we would finally progress and it would advance. But they're still looking towards the stars. But they're not looking at him as something that points to God and his story and his faithfulness. They now start looking to the stars to control their own fate, to know their future. It's how they start dealing with their anxiety and their worry about the unknown because they're pushing God out of their lives. It starts using God's good creation in idolatrous ways, and it leads to worship and all sorts of things. But it's this cultural tradition of which the Magi inherited in which God snags them out of. And he uses the star to do it. He speaks to them through his creation. Now, what they heard or what they saw, I don't know. There's been interesting theories that have been put forth. I'm not an astronomer, I'm a biblical theologian, but they're interesting. So there's these guys by the names of Seiss and Bullinger, and they're working off another lady's work. And they suggest that these constellations and the stars and the path that the sun follows, and you start looking at them, and you look at the first one, this whole pattern, and you get to Virgo, the Virgin. Well, that's interesting. And you look at Virgin, and she's holding things in her hands. In one hand, she's got an ear of wheat. On the other, a branch. So now you have a virgin with an ear of wheat and a branch. Could it be that the branch goes back to the ancient prophecies, many that originated in the same area from which these Magi came? Jeremiah 23:33, Zechariah 3:8. All messianic promises. There will become a king, and he will be a branch. Or what about the wheat, representing fertility, offspring, seed? Could it be that this goes back to the first ancient prophecy in Genesis 3:15? That of a woman who will give birth to a seed, to an offspring, who will somehow be fully human and yet strong enough to defeat the dark power that antagonizes humanity. A promise that gets reiterated throughout Genesis to Abraham when God takes him outside and says, look at the stars, so will your seed be. Again in Genesis 22 to Abraham when he says that your offspring will be like the stars, and out of them will come one who will possess his enemies and will bless the nations. I don't know. Were they piecing something together here? I don't know. It's interesting, though. It's fascinating. Could it be that they're familiar with the prophecy in Numbers 24:17 that a star shall come out of Jacob and a scepter shall rise out of Israel? Or did they see something in the stars in the way that God reveals things to his prophets when he uses the stars throughout Scripture as imagery for the falling and the risings of kingdoms? Could they have seen that the kingdoms of the world were passing away and the one true kingdom was rising? I don't know. Probably deserves further research. But here's what I do know. What we're told in Scripture. That there was a star. And then God uses this star. He utilizes this creation to speak to the Magi and lead them to find the king and to bow to him in wonder. And in doing so, God leads them to an even greater revelation of who he is, meeting them face to face. See, that's what creation is meant to do. It's only a signpost. It points to the Creator. And it leads us through him to his wonder, pushing us closer to him. But we need more revelation. This is actually what Paul's talking about in Romans 10. He's saying, yeah, there is a message that has gone out through all of creation, but not everybody heard it. In fact, a lot of them didn't. But now there's a better revelation. It comes through Jesus. And it comes through the apostles and the one-offs who witnessed to his faithful life, death, and resurrection and ascension. This is why he cites Psalm 19. says, yes, can the creation tell us things? Yes, but we need a more focused revelation. See, Psalm 19 has a symmetry to it. It's divided into verses, 14 and 14 lines, if you go into the Hebrew text. The first, where they talk about God's revelation in creation. The next 14 lines, God's revelation in Torah, in his written word. And as one scholar says, the written revelation doesn't supplant the revelation of creation, but it sharpens its focus, gives us more detail. And in the written revelation, we meet the God of creation, who is also the God who cares deeply about humanity, who wants to heal us, rescue us from our brokenness, our sinfulness, our anxiety, our fear, our hopelessness, to live the good and beautiful life with him, with peace, joy, hope, and wonder. And don't miss this. In leading the Magi with the star, he leads them out of the old way of life, the life of Babel, where they look to the stars to try to figure out their fate, the life of anxiety, the life of wanting to control their own lives. And he leads them to a baby in a manger. And they don't whip out the star charts when they find him. They bow down and worship with awe and reverence, because that's the true antidote to fear and anxiety. Trusting God with our future and with our stories. But to get them there, he used his creation. He got them there through the star. That was their sign. That was for the Magi. There was another sign at the birth of Jesus, and it was for the shepherds. See, Luke, here's how he records the account. Speaking of the shepherds, and this will be a sign for you. You will find a baby wrapped in swaddling cloths and lying in a manger. See, the sign for the lowly shepherds wasn't the stars in the sky. It was part of the familiar, ordinary, everyday life of a shepherd. The manger. And notice their response when the shepherds find him in the manger. And they went with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the baby lying in a manger. And when they saw it, they made known the saying that he had been told them concerning this child. And all who heard it wondered at what the shepherds told them. This was good news, a king that could relate, that can identify with their lives, that could be found in the ordinary, seemingly mundane of life, and now imbue it with a sense of wonder. See, God is the author of this whole story. He's the author of the sky. He shows his glory in the stars, and it leads to wonder for the Magi. God's still doing that today. His wonder can still be seen in the very foundations of the earth. But then God shows up in the ordinary, everyday life of the manger. Well, that leads to wonder for the shepherds. See, God still longs to show us wonder in our ordinary, everyday lives. See, what the Magi and the shepherds both had in common was that God spoke to them through the familiar, the things that were familiar to their lives. For the Magi, they knew the stars. The shepherds, well, they knew the manger. See, God often shows up in the familiar, but we miss it. That's what I don't want us to do this Christmas. See, in the story of the rabbi who prays and seeks God and says to him, "Show me your wonder," God doesn't take him to some mountaintop extravagant experience. There's no fire from heaven. There's no vision of angels. Nothing extraordinary. He shows the rabbi a child being born, a person showing kindness, the sun rising, a family gathered together at a table. All confused, the rabbi says, "Where's the wonder?" And God replies, "If you could see the world as I see it, you would know that that is wonder. See, like the rabbi, we need our eyes opened to see the world as God sees the world. Let's not miss the wonder of this Christmas by letting the familiar going unnoticed. See, don't miss the wonder of the excitement and the anticipation and the joy in little ones' faces tonight. Don't miss the wonder of the little pitter-pattering feet tomorrow morning. Don't miss the wonder of the sun peeking through and breaking through the darkness of night. Don't miss the wonder of a shared meal around a table, the embrace of a loved one. Don't miss the wonder of a cherished memory of loved ones who have now gone to be with the Lord, and the promise of knowing you'll be united with them again. You'll see their face, you'll take in the joy of their eyes, and once again, feel the warmth of their embrace. Now that's a wondrous thing. And don't miss the wonder of being gathered here together tonight. The sounds of little ones among us, of being able to see each other's faces as those who are gathered together as the redeemed people of God. And if right now, this Christmas, it seems like the darkness is pervasive and more prevalent than the light, well then take heart. See, in the scriptures, the sun and the moon, they also represent the old covenant and the new covenant. See, the moon is associated with the old covenant. There's a reflection of light. There's a glimmer of it, but there's mostly still darkness. But then there's the new covenant. The Son has come. The Son of righteousness has risen, and his name is Jesus. And those who have walking in the darkness have seen a great light. See, when we trust him, when we humbly bow ourselves down to him as the Magi, he begins to fill our lives with its light. And tonight, we celebrate the wonder and the birth of the one who was the light of the world. May his light fill you this Christmas, and may your heart have a renewed sense of wonder. Merry Christmas.